Good morning. Today we're going to talk about community and communication, because the two things really go together. And I think, we've sort of been through the information age, and really now we're coming to the age of community, where it seems to me that we're so much better connected. And we have social media now that we didn't used to have. We're so much better connected. I moved away from my hometown 1,500 kilometers north, and I probably see my friends and family there more often than I used to when I was living really close, because it's so much easier. It's so much easier to get from A to B. We travel so much more than we used to, where we communicate so much better on the internet and on the phone. So it really has made such a big difference, and we would think in that way that we're closer as a community. But I think actually it's also at the same time become very socially isolating. And if we look at social media, for example, it seems to me the more connections we get on social media, the more isolated a lot of us feel. And I think that's because there's some really negative things about social media, and there's been a lot of research done on this, so we know that. So what I want to talk about today is, how we can make a really nice, supportive community of equine scientists, or, horse owners, where people feel supported and welcomed and can come and ask questions and learn things without that sort of horrible peer pressure and judgment that you do get so much, especially when it concerns horses on social media. And I don't know, I'm not a dog person, so I don't spend much time on those sorts of sites, but is it the same in all areas of life, that people are so judgmental and rude to one another on social media? I don't know. But I think that's one of the things about the Can-Do community that I've been really, really pleased with, is how supportive it is, how you can come along and ask questions about anything. And we're all there to help and support, but also to learn. And that's one of the most appealing things for me about equitation science, is that equitation science isn't a system. It's just about learning theory. And so you can take the training principles of equitation science and you can apply them to anything at all, any training method at all that you have. And you quite quickly learn whether or not that method is in the best interest of the horse. And so I think that is what makes equitation science so appealing, and also what gives it the ability to make really nice, supportive and strong communities that will, in the long run, really benefit the horse. So let's, look at what we've looked at during this last week, for example, within the Can-Do equine training, and what we've been talking about in our community. And one of the things that's come up has been the use of different types of headgear. So bitless bridles and bosals and bits, and we've been discussing this at length. And it's been really, really interesting. And what I've really enjoyed actually is one of the members has put up some videos of her own that she's made with her horse. And she's got the horse there and she's trying different things on, and she's showing how each of these bits of equipment affect the horse and what you can do with them and what you can't do with them. And it's just fabulous, because she's done a really good job of explaining it, and she's done a really good job of just showing you exactly what happens when you pick up pressure on these different bits of equipment. So I think she's looked at quite a complicated bit. That was one of them, that had a nose band that went across quite low down, and the bit also had a shank on it, so it was giving pole pressure, nose pressure, bit pressure, and it was twisting in the mouth. And it really, by the time you've taken all these things into account, it did look quite confusing. And I think that's another point that we'll come on to. But then she was talking about the difference, because the discussion began about the difference between a bitless bridle and a bosal. And what we were saying was that a side pull bitless bridle is a clearer signal for the horse, because it's just coming from one side, whereas a bosal, the pressure comes from underneath. So it's quite difficult for the horse to distinguish between different pressures or where the pressure is coming from. And one of the training principles within equitation science, of course, is that it's very important that you give the horse clear, distinguishable signals. And so that was what we were saying was really for training, for learning for the horse. The Bosu is probably a more advanced thing, and I know that in Western they use that as a basic foundation training thing, and they move on to a bridle, or actually a big shank bit in this case. But I think really if we're looking at the principles and we're looking at how equitation science works and how to apply learning theory, you're much better off giving the horse a clearer signal to start with. And then by all means, once your horse has learnt softness in the bridle, to travel in frame, shoulder control, reverse arc, all of those things, take the bridle off. You won't need the bridle after that. But when put the Bosu on or anything else, but give the horse the benefit of making your signals clear and easy to understand and distinguishable from one another right at the beginning. And I think that's really important. But I did love the way everyone came together in this discussion, and everybody had, something to say about it, which was great, because it is very important that you feel that you can come into a group like that and put your 2 cents worth in. Because quite often, if you're intimidated by a group, and I know there's some particularly nasty forums around that concern horses and training and feeding and management and just generally, and you go and you put your 2 cents worth in there, and you can get absolutely chopped down, which is not a great place. I think that what we get from this idea of having a nice, safe, supportive community is exactly what we're trying to build for our horses. And it's a bit like trying to explain something to the horse when we don't quite understand it ourselves. So by building a community where it's supportive and safe and open to change, then we can also helps us with our relationships with our horse and building that same sort of feeling of support and partnership with our horses. I think that a lot of the time, one of the big things, certainly about the can-do community, is that, and me in particular, is that I'm always open to change. I think we learn stuff every day. Every time I handle a horse, I learn something new. And, if it's something useful, I'm going to come and tell you about it as well. And I think that's also what the can-do members do. They come in and say, hey, I tried it this way and it worked really well. So I'm always up for that. And so if you have a new way of teaching something, or if you say, hey, I've always taught hindquarter control, for example, in this way, how about we try this? What we can do then is we can run through the training principles, the equitation science training principles, and say, okay, well, does this way of teaching it fit with those principles, or could we make it simpler? And it's great because, if I can make a lesson easier for the horse to understand, it's going to be shorter. If it's easier for me to understand, I'm going to be better at explaining it to my horse. Anything that I don't quite understand, I just can't begin to explain to my horse. So I need to understand it really clearly. I need to understand the spot on the horse I want to move. I need to fully understand what direction I want that to go. I need to understand what pressure I'm using. And I just want that to be one pressure to start with, what pressure I'm using to get that spot to move in that direction. And I need to understand exactly when I'm going to release that pressure and reward the horse. And I think we talk a lot about pressure release, and people say, oh, I use pressure release. But we don't often define the release well enough. And that is, of course, the most important thing. The horse makes that mental connection between the pressure, the movement, and the release. So the horse learns, oh, okay, I feel a pressure. Let's say it's a bit pressure there, and I move my head to this direction, and it gets released. And so when you start to pick up pressure, the horse learns this pattern. When you start to pick up pressure, the horse just moves its head in that direction, which is you know, why when we were talking about the Bosal as compared to the bitless bridle, why the bitless bridle was a better idea, because it gave the horse a clearer cue. So the more clear we can be, the faster the horse is going to learn that lesson. The faster the horse learns the lesson, the less stress the horse is likely to experience while learning. And so that has got to be a good thing. We often, you know, I often hear people say, oh, what's the cue for canter? And my answer to that is whatever you've taught your horse. It doesn't really matter what your cue is to canter, as long as you teach it to the horse. It's this assumption that the horse already knows these things that gets us into trouble. I remember when I was doing my coaching qualifications with Equestrian Australia, and I was at the university, actually. I did the first one with the university. And we were there and we were doing all the practical stuff. So it was my turn to teach a lesson. And it's just, you know, right then they give you, this is your topic. This is what you've got to teach. And here's your group of students. Off you go and teach that. And my lesson was actually Travers. I had to teach them Travers. And I stood up. Right, okay, everybody get off your horse. And I started teaching them. I started teaching how to teach the horse to engage its hindquarter from the ground. And the instructor came up to me and said, no, you're not allowed to train the horse. You're only allowed to teach the rider how to ride it. And I said, yeah, but none of these horses know how to do it. So what's the point in teaching the rider what position to sit in if the horse doesn't know the cue? Is all that's going to happen. So what he wanted me to do was teach the riders to move their outside leg back to push the hindquarters to the inside and engage the hindquarters. And, you know, this was a course where you bring your own horse. So everybody was riding young horses. None of them had learnt Travers. And so all we were going to be able to do was to teach the riders to muscle the horse into this lesson. And I'm like, yeah, not really what I want to do. But it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because that's a real communication failure. And I find this is one of these things I've been arguing for many years now, is to have some more horse training inside those coaching qualifications, because there's not a country actually in the world, I don't think at the moment, that has real horse training in their equestrian coaching qualification. So you can become an instructor without ever actually knowing how to train the horse. And I've always thought this was quite interesting, because I've got some British Horse Society coaching qualifications as well. And I've lived in the States, although I don't have any coaching qualifications there, just British Horse Society in Australia. But I've always said, you know, the English ride beautifully. The Australians, you know, ride pretty well. But on average, the Americans don't ride as well, but their horses behave really well. The English, the horses usually behave terribly, often behave terribly. The Australians, you know, they're a bit in the middle. And I think the reason is that the Americans have horse trainers. So if you have a problem with your horse, you send it to a trainer. The English don't have a history of having horse trainers. The English only have a history of having riding instructors. Things have changed now. Of course, you know, I'm talking a couple of decades ago. Things have changed. But the English, if you have a problem with your horse, you go to your instructor and you learn to ride through it. So that's why their riding is so good. Their horses don't behave that well. Whereas the Americans wouldn't put up with any of that. They'd just send the horse out to be trained. But they never really get that riding experience that the English have got. And the Australians, we've always had a few horse trainers here and there. And we're a bit more sort of get on, do it yourself group of people, I suppose. So it's very interesting. I do think things have changed. Things have changed now that we're learning, actually, that we can train our own horses. And now that we are developing communities of people that are making that possible. I remember years ago when I was learning how to train my own horse as well, and a very good trainer telling me, don't tell them everything. You know, always keep a little bit back so that they keep coming back to you. I thought, well, that's not really what I wanted to do. I want to tell them everything so that they'll keep coming back to me to learn more, because I think certainly within the can-do community, there are a lot of very experienced riders. And I think they come from a place where I came from, you know, in about 2000, just before I found John Lyons, which was, I know what I want to teach. I know I can write. I know all these things, but I just don't know quite how to teach it. And so a lot of what I went there for was to find just the method, you know. And once you learn that, you can actually teach anything you want. Once you learn you can teach anything you want, it's really exciting. And quite often the only help that this community and Can Do is giving you is to find just what spot it is on the horse you want to move and the direction you want it to go and how you're going to motivate the horse to do that. And so that becomes really exciting. And what I love watching, and right at the moment, the registration for the training is open, and I just love watching people come in and say, oh, wow, I went out and I taught Give to the Bear, I taught something, one of the first lessons, you know, and they suddenly realize that they can not only teach their horse pretty much anything they wanted to learn, but the relationship with their horse, and they start building that bubble of communication, is incredible. And you get this concentration and focus from your horse that you'd never sort of dreamed about before. And that's the community of people that I'm trying really hard to build here. And I think that comes from being able to break things down and explain and discuss together. So once I understand it and once I can break it down enough to explain it to my horse, then I can explain it to you, and you can go out and explain it to your horse, and you come back to me and say, oh, I found it a little bit difficult here, or my horse did X, Y, and Z here. And we can address that, and we can look at that and discuss that together and see how we might better explain it to your horse. So I think the first thing that we need really is openness and transparency. And I think equitation science is going to give us that. So what I'm really wanting, my real hope, is that we have in the future a wider, more open, more transparent equestrian community that works together instead of against one another. And there's the equestrian community is very wide and very varied, but I think we need to embrace the commonality of the wanting the best for the horse. And until we do that, we're on a bit of a hiding to nothing, really, aren't we? But one of the things that's going to get us there, and things that are changing slowly, is to start, first of all, at the top end. So looking now at things like opening up the warm-up arenas at the dressage and those sorts of things, so that people can actually see what's going on. I think that's something that we need to be aware of, is not just the end result. So quite often all the public sees is the end result. This is the horse dancing and the dressage test. Well, let's actually find out how that horse learnt that lesson. Let's see what is going on behind those closed doors, because that's where the horse's welfare is really taking shape, and that's where we need to make the changes. It's a bit like the training that you see, the training videos that you see where the horse is perfect. Oh, that's great. But what happens when you go home and you try and get your horse to do that? Your horse doesn't behave in the same way. Your horse throws its head up, or your horse pulls to the side, or your horse opens its mouth, or any of these things happen. You're going to think you're doing it wrong, or you're going to think that it's the horse's fault. Maybe your horse is a bit stupid. And so all of these things happen. And what happens to the horse is usually these things go downhill, and it leads to punishment, especially when you start making assumptions about your horse's ability to learn. And it's easy to do that when your horse isn't responding in the same way as the horse is in the training video. And I think that's why it's so important for me to have mistakes and problems and things in my training videos. So all of my training videos are made with horses learning the lesson. So, it's very much, this is what it looks like when you start. And not all lessons are pretty. They really aren't. It doesn't mean that it's it goes on for a long time. You know, quite often, just the first minute, the first few minutes aren't brilliant. But as soon as the horse picks up, makes that mental connection with the pressure that it's feeling and the spot direction it has to move that body part, you really quickly see that horse go, I know now. Every time I feel that pressure, if I move my left foot to the right, the pressure gets released. That's all we're doing in training, is making that connection really solid for the horse. And it's great, I always think, to see these horses make these connections. I spend most of my time working with educationally young horses. And it's just fabulous to see them make that connection. I was actually in Sydney the other day and I saw a horse for the first time, this lovely little Brumby. And the horse, you know, started under saddle. The child has been riding it around in, you know, of all places, the centre of Sydney in Centennial Park. But it was really tense, this little horse. It was, the child wasn't with the child's mother was with the horse. And anyway, so at the start of the lesson, I said, you get on, ride the horse. Let's see how you go. And dear little horse, but very tense. So it was sort of in frame, but it was using all the muscles under its neck to hold itself in a sort of false outline. It was going around like this. I've never seen so much tension in a 14 two-hand pony. Just gorgeous though. Anyway, so I said, okay, well, let's see if we can get him to relax, and we talk give to the bit. So 5-10 minutes on the ground and teach and give to the bit. And then I asked her, I said, you know, you obviously can't always ride the horse. Would you like to learn to long rein? She said, oh, yeah, that'd be really useful. We taught the horse to long rein. Anyway, at the end of the lesson, I popped her back on, and this horse is completely different. She said, I couldn't recognize it. We walked, trot, and canter. The horse stayed in frame, stayed relaxed in this really soft outline, traveling around in this bubble, and she was mind-blowing. Anyway, she went away, and she wasn't a member of the training. She went away and worked the horse for 2 weeks, and then the daughter rode it again. She hadn't ridden it in 2 weeks, and the daughter couldn't believe it was the same horse. Said, oh my God, you know, the horse is so relaxed. It's so easy to ride now. Anyway, the owner wrote to me and said, you know, where do I join up so that she can come and do the online training, which is lovely. It'd be lovely to have her in the community as well. So that's the sort of thing, you know, making it terribly clear, and, you know, showing these mistakes, showing how the horse learns. As we're training, we've got to see how the horse learns. And people worry about the horse getting confused. That's one of the things that we don't want to confuse the horse. So things that are confusing for the horse are things like pulling up in front and pushing behind. So, you know, you hear a lot in modern dressage, hold him up in front, wrap your legs around him, squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. You hear this a lot. So the horse is like, that's very confusing for the horse. And any unrelenting pressure is very confusing for the horse. So if you say, you know, you want to hold a good contact, that's unrelenting pressure. It's confusing for the horse because it doesn't go away. So the horse just desensitizes to that in the same way as it does to the, you know, push me, pull you thing going on. So we need to be really clear on what our cues are. But, you know, always when we learn something, right at the beginning of a lesson, and you'll remember this at school when you were learning algebra or whatever it was, you get a bit confused, and that's okay. That's all right too, you know. It's all right to be a little bit confused while you're learning something. That's sort of the whole process, really. If you weren't at all confused, well, you already knew it, and so teaching the thing would not be important. Our job is to make the confusion as short-lived as possible. Our job is to make it as clear as possible. And so that really is also where EBARC, which is my PhD project, hopefully launching at the end of this month, comes in. And again, it's all about community and communication. EBARC is finding out, it's a longitudinal study on horse training, management, and behavior. And what we're going to do is we're going to find out how the ways we train and manage our horses affects their behavior. and how this changes over time. So let's say your training regime changes over time. And obviously your horse's behavior is going to as well. Now, let's say you decide that you're going to start doing a whole lot of round pen work where you chase the horse around the round pen or something. Because EBUC is a 6-monthly sort of longitudinal study, we can look at that same horse in 6 months and see whether chasing it around the round pen has improved its behavior and safety sort of thing and welfare or not. And we can go back and say, right, well, now we've actually found out that this is probably not a very good idea to be chasing a horse around the round pen, because it results in the horse being more flighty. It results in the horse using that as an escape mechanism under saddle. So maybe it, results in the horse bolting under saddle. There might be all sorts of things that we learn from that. And we can come back to this equestrian community and say, hey, this is what we found out. This is good, solid science that is showing us the actual results from what we're doing. And this is something that hasn't been done with horses before. It has been with some other animals, like dogs, for example. But you'll notice that horse welfare lags massively behind dog welfare. There's things you can do to horses that you could never do to a dog. Well, you can do pretty much anything to a horse, actually. And not so for a dog. If any of you have seen those pictures on Facebook with the dog with the masking tape wrapped around its nose, and that person was charged with cruelty. And then next to it is a photograph of somebody in a dressage test with the horse's mouth clamped closed so tight that it can't even swallow. And that person won first prize at Olympics or something. So it's completely different, and we really do need for horse welfare to catch up to other animals. It's very important, and I think that we're only going to be able to do that with a good, strong, supportive, larger equestrian community. So I have to say that I'm very proud to be starting that, both the EBUC project and the Can Do community as a start to build larger, stronger equine communities around the world. Thank you very much for staying with me today, and I will see you next week. And if you hang around, if you have some questions, I'm going to open up the Q&A in just a sec.